Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for waiting. We are back with another virtual event. I am Nick, the Director of Events for Mysterious Galaxy. Today, we have two wonderful authors with you. And of course, we are first and foremost celebrating the newest release for Tasha Suri, the Oleander Sword, the second in her Burning Kingdom series. Hi, Tasha!
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Yay! Happy book launch week. And of course, in conversation, we have Vaishnavi Patel. I got that right, did I?
Yes,
Yay!
you got it right.
Hi, Vaishnavi.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
So glad to have you. For those of you tuning in who may not be familiar with the authors, Tasha was born in London to Punjabi parents. She studied English and creative writing at Warwick University, is now a cat-owning, I love this part, cat-owning librarian in London. Wonderful. A love of period Bollywood films, history, and mythology led her to write South Asian-influenced fantasy. And of course, in conversation, we have Vaishnavi, a law student focusing on constitutional law and civil rights. Wow. She likes to write at the intersection of Indian myth, feminism, and anti-colonialism. She is also the author of Kaikei. For anyone who has not yet purchased any one of the author's books, how dare you? But you have a chance to do that. If you click the link below, that'll take you to our website, and you can get the Oleander Sword. You also can get the first book in the series, and we have some wonderful art prints from Tasha here that we'll include in your order. These are so cool. I was so pleased to see that we were getting these, like, oh, yay! But not only that, if you buy Vaishnavi's book, we have signed book plates, which just arrived yesterday, just in time for the event. And I have to say, that looks awesome. I love book plates that tie into their books. Was that your decision or the publisher's decision?
It was the publisher's decision. I was just sort of like, I'm thinking of having book plates for my pre-order campaign. They were like, we'll design them. And then they perfectly matched the cover, which was amazing.
It's so fun to have like that little bit of detail just added in. Just shows how much, especially your publishers, are really like caring about you and your book too, I think. Instead of like, oh yeah, we'll just put out whatever.
I love Kaikei, actually. It's got these gorgeous... I wish I had my copy. It's over on the back shelf, but it's got these gorgeous deckled edges as well. Vaishnavi, you don't have a copy handy, do you?
I don't. It's like just out of reach. But yes, it does have deckled edges, which I am a huge fan of, but I recently found are actually a little controversial. Like some people don't like deckled edges.
What?
I like how tactile they are. I always just want to touch them. I think they're really nice.
I agree, but then somebody told me they didn't know that I like had a book out with deckled edges. They were just like, you know, they weren't like trying to dunk on it, but they were like, it just feels like the page cutting machine messed up, and we got like the like messed up pages for the.
Oh, sweet summer child.
I'm never saying anything about my book now, but thanks for that.
As a bookseller, I've gotten that a few times where someone's like, is there something wrong with this book? I think it may be a misprint. Like it's aesthetic. It's called deckled edging. Yeah. But yes, it's so funny when people point that out, thinking like they found like a horrible misprint in all these copies of this one particular book. Anyway, if you have any questions that you would like to, it looks like some of you already found it. Good job. If you'd like to submit any questions, I would ask it later on in the program. There's a link below that says ask a question. And if, you know, depending on how many questions there are, we'll try to answer as many as possible. I'm going to go ahead and disappear now and leave it to these wonderful authors to go ahead and take it away. But I'll see everyone at the end of the program.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm so excited to be here with Tasha because I've been a huge fan basically since Empire of Sand. So this is like a little fangirl moment for me. But before we really get into it, I was hoping you could just say a few words about the Burning Kingdoms trilogy. Oleander Sword is the second book. So if you want to, I'm sure you have like a non-spoilery blurb that you give that you can probably do much better than me, which will just spew spoilers everywhere.
Oh no, Nick actually said before we started, I'm sure you have like a little quote now for this book. And I was like, no, because it's the second one and I've never spoken about it anywhere. But this is a mutual fangirl moment because I loved Kaikei and I just adored it. It was so brilliant. So this is the Spider-Man meme going on that we can both, yeah.
Perfect.
So after I've described the Oleander Sword, I would love if you like briefly told everybody about Kaikei as well, because some of them may not have read it and I would like them to. But anyway, yeah, so the Oleander Sword is the sequel to the Jasmine Throne, and I always describe the Jasmine Throne as the story of two morally grey lesbians working together to burn down an empire. Actually, I would say the first book is them working up to that. It's kind of the superhero / villain origin story. One of them is imprisoned, the other one is a maidservant. And then they kind of come into their own. So the second book is the one where the burning really starts to go down and things really start happening. And hopefully that isn't at all spoilery. It's just where things really start to get going. And I found that quite exciting.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And that ties exactly into a question that I have. But I'll give a really brief blurb of Kaikei, which is Kaikei is basically a retelling of an ancient Indian Hindu myth called the Ramayana, which is the story of this great Prince Ram who goes on this sort of 14-year exile and journey. And Kaikei is his evil stepmother who exiles him at the start of the story and is basically the reason that he goes on all of these adventures. And she's long been sort of viewed as very evil and petty. And Kaikei is my attempt to give her a voice and to tell her side of the story. So I'm just like simultaneously reading the chat. Yes, this is a mutual fangirl moment, I guess, which is even better. So I know I sent some questions, but I'm going to scramble it up a little bit, which is in particular, you mentioned, so Jasmine Throne is like very much like the origin story. And to me, I was reading it and I was like, oh my God, just kiss. But it's like the slowest of slow burns. And where it ends, this is a very mild spoiler, but the characters are now in sort of two very different places in their story from where they started in the Jasmine Throne, which was sort of coming into contact and that sort of first contact, getting to know each other moment. But now they're both far more powerful and in very different places from one another. So does that affect like your writing process? Did it affect how central the romance was? Because so much of the Jasmine Throne was just this like tension building up between these two. And now that they're so powerful and so separated, did that sort of affect your writing process?
Yes. So I think what's really, I love a slow burn romance. It's one of my favorite kind of things. I love when you watch a TV show or you read a book and you're like, why won't they just kiss? Why won't, and then they touch hands and you're like, and that gives you energy to keep going a bit longer. So, so in the first book, Malini and Priya are very much in the same space. The story is actually, for all that it's epic, it's in this kind of small location and a lot of things are happening in a very small locale. So we have a lot of time to focus on their interactions. Again, without spoilers, the scope of the world really widens in the second book, which means that I can't always focus on a kind of closeness between them. And that was a little bit tricky because although I think of the Burning Kingdoms trilogy as something larger than the romance is also a really key driver. So it's not a fantasy romance, but it's a fantasy with a lot of romance in it.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do I get that relationship with them across, even in this larger scope? And there were kind of two things that really played into that. One, I knew that I kind of had to tie their love story in with larger political sea changes. So they are on not necessarily opposite sides in the War for the Throne, but they are beholden to different factions. So Priya, who is a magical priestess, essentially, cares about her people and her nation, whereas Malini, who is a princess who wants to depose an emperor, cares more about the empire, and they have very different priorities. So that kind of means there's a bit of a push and pull between their desire for each other and their desire to do right by their own people, which are often at odds. On a less kind of grand scale, I also tried to think about the ways that lesbians or sapphic women had communicated desire and love in history. when they couldn't always be in the same space, or when they couldn't express their feelings openly. And they usually often did that, or at least as far as we know, because we have to look at historical records, and historical records are written, not oral. They did so through love letters, often quite coded love letters. So I was like, I'm going to do some love letters, because that's a very gay thing that I can bring into the story. And that's what I did. And I tried to bring in like little hints of poetry and yearning, and they are quite sappy in a certain way. But I was like, but they would be. If you're writing a love letter to somebody who you don't know if you're going to be able to be with, you would be a little bit sappy. So that was quite fun to play with.
I love that. And I was about to say letter writing. So excited you brought that up. So you talked about how, book one really does have this very strong sense of place, both in Ahiranya, but also in the temple specifically. Like, you feel the temple, you feel the walls, and like the places where you shouldn't go, and the magic that's in it, and whatever's going on beneath the temple. Like, you feel that. But something I also loved was that there were all these hints of like how much world there is outside of this temple and this one kingdom or nation or region. And obviously in Oleander Sword, we are starting to see a lot more of that. So was that always your plan, to like start in one very specific building almost, and then to like expand out? Was it tough? Was this like the part you were looking forward to? I could not pull this off if my life depended on it. So I'm very curious as to how people like you manage it.
Oh my God, Vaishnavi, I will talk about how it felt trying to pull that off. But it was, so I knew on a purely practical level, because I'd written 2 books with my publisher before, when I started writing The Burning Kingdoms, I had to say, hey, this is what I want to write. Could you give me some money for it, please? So I sent them a little summary of book 2 and book 3, which meant I had to at least kind of think about the direction the story was going. So I knew that we were going to start in one place, and then we were going to go somewhere much broader, and then we were going to go somewhere else in book 3. Who knows? So I knew that was going to happen, and I'd kind of tried to seed little bits of that in with little suggestions of how culture works for other people. So, for example, we have in the first book Rao, who worships the nameless god rather than the mothers, which is the predominant religion of the empire. And his culture shines through in certain ways because it's his culture. So it's sort of there. You have people from Sakata, you have who clearly have a system with a high prince and a low princes beneath that. And you have the Durali, who live on the sort of the edge of the empire. So they're kind of hinted at. And I knew that I was going to delve into that a little bit more in the second book. And I was excited about that. I like building cultures, and I like to see the ways that they interact. And I hadn't really done that in previous books as much. So I thought that would be really exciting. What I realized was actually quite hard is battle scenes. So I had to go from this sort of small scale story focused on the politics between people and the way that they navigate those politics to now these politics are going to be represented through a cavalry and infantry and chariots. And I was like, oh God, I've made a mistake. I found that really, really hard to do. I was very, very stressed about that. But then I kind of did exactly what I do with most of my books, which is I look at history for a little bit of guidance and inspiration. So there were a few big battles in the book that were inspired by battles that ostensibly were carried out by Alexander the Great. Can't remember the exact names of the battles, but I basically lifted one almost perfectly.
Love that.
And I also kind of try to do a lot of world building with the other cultures in small ways. So we go to the Raleigh at one point, and I'm like, well, of course they will have a goat's wool rug, and the architecture will look like this, and the clothing will look like this. So it was sort of like hinting little things in, but I don't delve in as much as maybe I would have loved to, but there wasn't any time around the plot.
Yeah, so that actually, something I loved about Jasmine Throne when I was reading it was, this is not a critique of like other South Asian fantasy, because I've loved, every South Asian fantasy book that I've read, but a lot of times it's very inspired by one culture, one place, one time. Mm-hmm. So you're getting like a great glimpse of a particular South Asian culture, but you often don't get the like huge constellation of multiculturalism that was there even between, groups that spoke the same languages, that lived in sort of two slightly different climates, not even getting into like, you know, how big that area is and how many religions and cultures and empires and kingdoms have existed throughout the period of time. But I feel like in Jasmine Throne, I really felt like, oh wait, I can like see a little bit of this in each different kingdom and world. And I feel like I am getting some of that multicultural interplay and the tensions inherent in that, and trying to have some sort of governing structure sitting on top of all of that, and what sort of tensions come from that. So I really love that. And I'm wondering, was that purposeful? Like, were you drawing on particular historical movements or conflict, or were you inspired by like, I don't want to get into South Asian politics today unless you do, but like, were you inspired by something like that? Or was it just did it just like happen as you found different pieces in your research that you wanted to include?
It's interesting, actually. Like, I just wanted to touch on your point about like a lot of South Asian fantasy drawing on maybe one region or one culture. And I think that I definitely did that in my first book. So I'm not taking it as a read. I think it's really difficult because
I mean, I did that. So like
yeah,
I'm not knocking my own book really, but like it's true. It's hard. It's hard to like write about that huge scope because it's like billions of people.
Yes, and also it's like, and what I loved in Kaikei is the way you drew on different kind of different narratives, and I don't want to say retellings, but different iterations of the Ramayana. Yeah. Like, it wasn't just one, and I think that in itself is a very difficult thing to do. And what I think can be hard, especially in fantasy, which Kaikei isn't, you know, although it kind of sits on that kind of mythic line.
It's sort of on the cusp, yeah.
Yeah. It's, I think when you take it out of, if you take it further away from its roots, the difficult thing is, I think, with a lot of Western fantasy, arguably you have like a history of melding different cultures together. Like a lot of, I'd argue, like a lot of kind of faux medieval draws from, you know, different parts of the Mediterranean and also from British, and then also et cetera, et cetera. Whereas when you're writing South Asian fantasy broadly, you don't have that history of kind of melting it together. So I would have found that really difficult to do in my first books. And when I hit the Jasmine Throne, I thought, I want to draw on all the things that really interest me. But I don't know that I want to connect any culture in the book too closely with any real Indian or broadly South Asian culture too closely. I think I did in some cases, but
I just saw little pieces. Like, I was like, oh wait, yes, this feels like a little bit like this one thing in, say, Buddhism, but this doesn't feel Buddhist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's really tricky because I also think, like you touched on, South Asian politics, they're complex and difficult, and as someone in the diaspora, my relationship with them is also complex. So I don't really want to go in and sort of kick over a bucket and cause drama with what I'm writing, unless I'm choosing to do that consciously, which is a different thing. So I know that, for example, I know with the religion of the nameless god, and with the Alorans in particular, I drew a lot on my own part of my own cultural background. So I drew from Sikhism and Sikhi. But I think there is also very strong Buddhist like influences in there as well. I mentioned like Sunyata, for example, which is that from, I also drew from Jainism at some point, but I can't remember where. This is very bad. I should keep a better track of my own sources.
I mean, in some ways, like, not to really step in it, but all of these different traditions, both religious and cultural, were like just feeding off of each other and mixing and melding and matching. And like the religions that we have today are so different even from the ones that were present 200 years ago because of this constant interplay. So to me, it's like, this is great. This is how we got our real
No, I 100% agree with you. And it's also like, even oh god, I shouldn't step in this, but even it's our understanding of Hinduism today is well, let's just keep going. Our understanding of Hinduism today is so distinct from Hinduism from the past, because arguably I don't think it was like one concrete religion in the way that we now codify religion. So
absolutely.
So it's complex. Like, they're not to denigrate anybody's lived belief unless I disagree with it, obviously. But it's complex. It's complex.
Yeah.
So yeah, I drew on different things for the Alorans, and then the Durali was so clearly inspired by the Mughals. I think I didn't even pretend otherwise.
That one was a little like, we've got
that one was going.
But in a good way.
Think was kind of like I kind of thought that's such a big part of what makes North India. You can't just leave it out. Like, so I had to bring that into the kind of in the story. So yeah, and definitely drew from parts of South India. Definitely like the temple design and structure was very I was inspired by a specific place, cannot remember the name of it right now, but I definitely drew from things like architecture. I looked at Tamil culture a little bit, but I didn't want it to be a perfect match, so I also drew from other things. But yes, it was an intentional decision, basically, to say it the long way around. But I wanted it to feel mythic. I wanted it to feel like this could be something familiar, but also could be something not. Like the way the best fantasy kind of draws on something that feels very true and real and strikes a cultural chord, but isn't an exact match, hopefully.
No, I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I really like that because I feel like I just mentioned, it's very true to how we end up with culture in the real world.
Yes.
But this reminds me of something else that I really liked about the Jasmine Throne. I'm so curious about, which is the magic, because there's just so many different, I'm sorry, I drank water and I'm like choking on it. So that's why I'm like tearing up. But
no, you're okay. You're okay. I thought I just made you so emotional with my answer.
No, I like literally, I was like drinking water and I was like, oh no, I did something bad. I struggle with drinking water on a daily basis.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh at you when you're suffering. Are you okay?
No, I'm fine. We should laugh at me because it's like a daily occurrence with me. But no, what I was going to say is that there's so many different types of magic as well. And, you know, we have Bria's magic and the magic of this temple and this place, which feels so rooted in place. And then just as like another example, we have like the prophecy magic with the names, which is so cool and so interesting. And I just loved how we have like, it's not just one, at least in the first book, it doesn't feel like there's one unifying magic system and everybody's like manipulating element 1 or element 2 or element 3, which is super fun to see, but doesn't feel as like, in a way, multicultural as it does when there's each place has their own deeply held traditions and beliefs, and those are like actually manifesting in magic. So were you inspired in your magic systems by cultural historical research, or were you just like, this seems like it fits the vibes or the tradition of each region? Like, how did you come up with this idea? And then also tell me your secrets about how you made it all seem so like seamless.
Editing. It's interesting because I think and I think this is true of all authors, some things come along because you do real intense research and you sit and you think and you go to museums or you read books and things come together and it's like magic, but it takes time. And sometimes it's just sheer chaos. So I could say that I came up with the prophecy magic, the idea that your name is a prophecy that can only be spoken when the prophecy must come true, which is one magic system. By thinking about things like the fact that you know, some people I know would have to like everybody had the first letter in their name in the family because when they'd gone to the Gurdwara, that was the letter that they were given and they all had to pick that one. Or, you know, the idea that your stars will define your fate. But actually it was that in my head, Rao was called Rao. And I was like, that's not a name. That's not a first name. That's a surname. I know. I'll come up with a reason for that. And that was it. That was the reason for it.
I was vibing so hard because the reason mine and my sister's first letters of our names are the first letters of our names is because like the stars said it had to be that way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I was like, yeah. And then the Rao reason, I was like, that's a reason I would give. Like, so I'm glad to learn that you are also human. But I love that.
No, yeah. It was absolute chaos. But the whole magic around water and the idea of taking in waters, that was partly inspired by just, you know, the kind of like veneration for water and for the Ganga and things like that. And then I just sort of ran with it. And but the one thing I would say is the Yaksa, although they are like a genuine real thing in Hinduism and mythology, I was so inspired by the Fae. And I can't pretend I wasn't. Like, it was very much the idea of these eldritch nature gods who are very capricious, that cannot be trusted. If you make deals with them, those deals aren't necessarily a good vibe. That was very much the influence that I had in that. And often when I say this to people,
every culture has that. like
Yes,
story,
right.
which makes you really wonder what was going on back then.
It is interesting. I remember reading a theory once that, you know how everybody's faces are asymmetrical? That if we see a perfectly symmetrical face, it makes us deeply uncomfortable. And that always makes me think of the fact that we have these kind of perfectly beautiful but untrustworthy beings in so many cultures. Like, what are we drawing on? What are we all afraid of?
Yes,
way
exactly.
back when. Yeah.
There was something. There was something.
There was something.
It's very creepy to think about. Wow. Now we've gone into the horror realm.
Now we're just scaring each other.
I know.
Yeah, so that was kind of the influences for the magic. And obviously with the fire magic, I feel like in a way it's quite clear what my influences were there. I remember, again, putting my foot in it, around the time I was coming up with the Jasmine Throne, the Padmavati film came out, and there was a huge political backlash to that film. And I did a lot of reading around the origins of the story, and what it means to people today, and also did a lot of reading about gender and things like that, and had a real think about how I feel about religion and gender, and then I brought that to the page. I will not say anything more than that, but it's just it kind of speaks for itself, I think, on my views.
Look, if you want to talk religion and gender, you've come to the right gal.
I would much rather hear your thoughts on religion and gender, honestly.
Oh, I don't know that we want to get into that today. But I mean, they're equally complicated, and I think that's like something that makes religion so tough for so many people, or at least like mainstream religion so tough for so many people, is that mainstream or like popular practice religions often tend towards this slightly more conservative and patriarchal version. And it's like you mentioned, especially Hinduism, which is what I grew up in, like wasn't that, there was no real mainstream or like true version. Like everybody had their own practice. Like we still have our own, household gods that are like particular to my dad's half of the village that his family came from. Like it's just so individualized and particular, and people had their own versions of stories. And I think that just, to me, like I like to go back to that and look at that, and I often find versions that are much more comfortable for me in terms of like providing space to talk about gender and equality, and also just like going beyond the gender binary, and like there's lots of options outside of that. So I'm not going to like I would 100% love if you got into that today. That's a comment. I don't think we have enough time left to get into it, so let's say that.
another time
perhaps.
I mean, I feel similarly. I think sometimes a story is kind of like this thing that you put out and you say, I don't necessarily know how I feel. I feel complicated about things. There are so many things that are empowering about faith and the way it interacts with culture, but they are also things that are very stifling and difficult, and the way that it is co-opted by certain fascist narratives and nation-building narratives. Yeah.
I mean, we also live in like Western countries where we see like Western religions do very much the same thing.
Exactly.
So.
And that's complicated. And then, of course, it's complicated when your religion isn't the majority faith in the area that you live in, and you feel like you have to talk about it in a certain way, blah, blah, blah. There's just a lot of stuff there. And the nice thing about a story is that you can start exploring that in a way and put it out and just say, well, I don't know how I feel either. You can also now see the complicated way I feel, and we can be confused together.
Exactly. We can be confused together is like the
tagline
of everything I write. So I love that. This is kind of related, but because we're just talking about magic and power. But something that I was thinking about a lot when I was reading the Jasmine Throne is how so many of these characters feel powerless, or they have been disempowered by either empire or the structures that they live in, or having to hide who they are, or literally being imprisoned in a temple. But they also end up having so much power and strength, often not in like the stab way, but like in other strengths and talents that they have hidden or fostered or used. And I love the way that this narrative sort of wove in power and strength outside of the warrior and fighting types. Although I know in the Oleander Sword, we're also going to see plenty of that. And I'm wondering, like, was that sort of purposeful? Was it like, were you trying to talk about power and strength in that way? Was it like the constraints of the story, which were like, we're trapped in this temple? and nobody can do anything about it? Like, sort of, how did you get there? Because it was like, I loved it. I loved it.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, it was intentional. It was intentional. I think that I read a very long time ago a book about Nur Jahan, which was actually it was about Shah Jahan, but it mentioned Nur Jahan a lot for reasons. And it was very critical of her on the basis that she was conniving, she was this, she was that, she was, she was manipulative. And I was like, but what else was she meant to do? Yeah, what else was she meant to do? Because essentially she's an empress from the Mughal Empire, for those who are not aware, because I just started talking without giving any context. And because she had to be veiled, she could not lead outwardly. So she had to have other people to help her. So there's a lot of stuff critical of her for raising up her uncles and her brothers and her father to positions of power. And I was just like, but then how else was she going to do stuff? Like, she couldn't do stuff if she didn't do that. But it's just one example of, I think, how often when we look at women's power in the past, we either don't see it, it's either completely invisible, or it's just, it's denigrated and criticized, and it's called other things. Manipulation, seduction, Bhumika, one of the characters in the Jasmine Throne, is married to a colonizer of her land and uses that as an opportunity to manipulate him and the power structures in order to protect her people. I love her too. I mean, I think that sometimes people assume that I'm saying, her way is right. I think her way is one way of like a bunch of different ways, and it has its flaws. But that doesn't make her inherently a bad, makes her morally grey, I suppose, but it doesn't make her inherently a bad person. It's one way of approaching power. And if she tried to rule in her own right, at least in the first book, she would not be able to do that. So yeah, essentially I wanted to look at different kinds of power and the ways that women have historically wielded them and put those at the center of an epic narrative. Because I think sometimes, and this is quite a sweeping statement, and fantasy is a huge genre, obviously, you'll have those women, but they won't be the center of the story. They'll be on the peripheries, there'll be male heroes fighting and using magic. And then there will be a maidservant on the side who happens to secretly have magic. And there will be a wife of an important man who is pregnant and doesn't do very much. And then her husband, well, no, that's a spoiler, but yes. And, you'll have a princess trapped in a tower. They won't be who the story is about. So I wanted to make them the center. That was quite fun.
I love that. I love how we see the story unfold from their eyes, because honestly, it's in many ways for me more interesting than watching men run around and stab each other, which I love how that is the background in the Jasmine Throne. Like, that's definitely happening, but like you get that in the background rather than in the foreground. And I love that. So I have more questions, but we have 25 minutes left and we have 10 questions in the chat already. So they're being like upvoted, so I can see what are the most popular questions. So we'll just sort of go in order. So the first question is from Stella, and it's, which character in the Burning Kingdoms trilogy was the hardest or easiest to write for?
Oh, that's a good question. I get amnesia every time I finish a book. I am working on book 3, so I should be able to answer this question. But I found Rook really hard to write, and he's not a major character. And I realize that sounds quite silly, but he's just a child. But I found him very difficult to get right in the narrative, and that took a lot of editing to get perfect. I find Bhumika really easy to write, I would say. I just, in a lot of ways, I think I love her in a special way because she's kind of who Meher from Empire of Sand would have been in a different world and a different context. She's got very much the same, Empire of Sand is one of my older books, very much the same kind of skills, the same kind of understanding of the world, but she exists in a very different world and therefore has to act in different ways. Yeah, I think that's about right. Priya and Malini, I always find fairly easy to write. I just love them. I love all of the women in the Jasmine Throne I can sit with quite easily. I
mean, that makes sense to me. We have a lot of Bhumika fans in the chat, like many of them, just so you know. People share my love, which I'm very pleased with. How did you get the idea for the Jasmine Throne and the Oleander Sword? And this question is from Ritika.
That's the name of my cousin. I hope it isn't my cousin. It might be my cousin. So yeah, weirdly, it's quite an odd story. I came up with the idea because I thought I would write another book in the same series as Empire of Sand. So I had Empire of Sand, Realm of Ash, which make a duology. And I thought I'll continue in that world. And I had set up a kind of fight between three siblings at the end of Realm of Ash. And I thought maybe I'll explore that a bit further, but I'll focus on different characters. And I thought I would focus on Priya. So she was one of the first characters that came to me. And then very quickly, the whole thing went out of my control. And I went, what if Priya fell in love with this character? And, oh, but they're both women. That's very different from the first two books. And what if this happened and this happened and this happened? So I wrote, well, when you're sending something to a publisher you already work with, you can just send a kind of a little pitch sort of saying, this is what I think I will do. So that's what I did. And I wrote like the whole plot of the first book out. And I said, this is what I think I would do in the book. And then didn't hear from my editor for quite a long time. And then she got back to me and she said, Tasha, this feels very different from your first books. It almost feels like the start of a very different story. In fact, you don't finish the story by the end of this book. So maybe it's its own series. Have you considered that? And I was like, oh yeah, maybe it is. Sometimes you have to be led. And then I thought, okay, if this is a new series and my first books were inspired by Mughal India, how do I make this different? And then I thought, why don't I just do everything that I want to do? What's stopping me? You know, why don't I just do it? So I thought I will draw on all the different kind of cultural and historical influences that I like. I'm not going to stick to one period of history. I'm just going to throw different periods of history together because that is what Western fantasy does. Why can't I do it?
I love it.
And so that's what I did. And then I rewrote the whole plan, changed loads of stuff, went much darker, decided I was going to have 100 points of view. Nobody told me to do that. That was just my decision. And it became its own book.
Teach me your secrets.
Chaos. The answer is chaos.
I feel like I'm already chaotic, but without the ability to write in multi-POV. So, you know.
I bet you could. Is your next book in multi-POV? Is it?
Oh,
can you
that's
nod
a
or
loaded,
shake your head?
That is a loaded question, my friend. That is a loaded question. Our next question is from Faye David, and it's what crossover friendship between your two books would form the quickest? What crossover rivalry would be the funniest? I can answer friendship because I feel like I know the answer, and that is that Malini and Kaikeyi would be like the most terrifying friendship you have ever seen in your life.
I just feel like, and I know this isn't who they are, but they're like the two mean girls at school. Like, it's terrifying to put those two together. Like
there would not be a struggle for the throne. It would already be. It would be over if those two got to like team up. It would be a little terrifying for sure.
They would be such a and I mean power couple in a non-romantic sense, but they would be. Sure. They would be a power couple. Absolutely.
Yes. Very scary for either world that they're in.
I don't know who'd be a rivalry because I kind of feel like they would both be a friendship and a rivalry given the right context.
Oh yeah, once they were like done with whatever conquering they wanted to do, it would be all downhill from there.
Yeah, then we would have a civil war. Yeah, this writes itself. This writes itself.
This crossover episode is like it's half written already. So the answer is they'd be friends and rivals. The best dynamic in many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
The next question is from Ryan, and it's what's a book that you consider formative for your writing style or your storytelling vision?
I always give the same. I'm actually curious about your answer, actually, as well.
Oh, God.
It's kind of a toss-up. So, Kushiel's Darts, which I read when I was way too young.
How young are we talking?
It's not important. Maybe 13. I don't remember anymore. Yeah, no one should have let me pick that book up. But I did. And yes, so that's a series about a courtesan who uses her erotic skills to basically do politics. I mean,
weren't we all reading fan fiction we shouldn't have been reading at 13? Like, how different is this, really?
That's true. Yeah, I was definitely reading fan fiction I shouldn't have been reading at 13. Yeah. There's no question about that.
We can all admit it now.
Maybe I still do. Who knows? But I
it's
also was
more
super
age appropriate.
Yeah, now it's fine. Now I'm in my 30s. Who cares what I read? Like, I can read anything. But yeah, at 13, definitely, I was reading things I shouldn't have. I also loved, and it's a weird one because it's not fantasy, Helen Dunmore's A Spell of Winter, which won the Orange Prize many, many years ago. And it's gothic. It's very dark. It's, if you want to read it, please check the trigger warnings. It starts with the line, "I saw an arm fall off a man once." And it was so beautifully written, it changed my life. So I think that's had a big influence on my style and what I value in fiction. Is someone shocked by my age?
Somebody is shocked by your age in the chat. I mean, I'm also a little shocked, but that's okay. You seem younger. Let's say that.
It's because I'm very immature, that's why.
I don't think that's why, but definitely not. I don't know what I would call my like literary influences. I think a book that like really blew my mind when I first read it was actually Roshni Chokshi's Star-Touched Queen. So I was just like,
oh, I love that book so much.
An Indian book with Hindu mythology. I was like, what is going on? Like, I read that book in college. I think it came out when I was in college, and it was just like a, you know, the world like shifts a little bit, but all of a sudden you're like, the possibilities. So I just think about that book a lot, because I don't know, I didn't feel like that was like one of the first like very Indian feeling books I read. I was reading a lot of like white man fantasy, which I love, and I loved then, I still love now. But I also, like, my public library was very small, so we had like one little shelf of the SFF books, and I read like every single Star Wars novelization ever, but I wasn't really reading like cultural fantasy. So that like opened the door for me in many, many ways.
I love that book as well. And I think what I love is her style is so distinct. Like so lyrical, so beautiful. And I like that it's like, you know, a Roshni Chokshi book when you pick one up.
I'm so excited for her next one,
the flower bride or something. I forgot the name of it.
I think it's like The Flower Bride. It's like the adult one. I'm so excited.
She was made to write gothic. Like, yeah. I'm really excited for it as well. Yeah.
Okay. What Indian epic tale deserves to have its own retelling in book format? This is another.
I feel like this is a question. I think this is a question for you more than me. I do. I
feel like there's so many stories that I would want to see rewritten. Like there's just like, I think even within, for example, the Mahabharata, you have like 50 different plot lines going on at any given time. And so I would just like love to see so many from them. But one that's like very, very near and dear to my heart is like young Krishna, like Krishna Radha. Like, I don't know if this is like okay to say, but like I would devour a Krishna Radha romance.
Oh my God, me too. And again, I don't know if it's okay to say,
but I would die for that.
My nanny used to watch all of the stuff on ZTV, and I just could not stop watching anything that had like young Radha and Krishna in. I was like,
I think it's okay because we've seen so many of those on the screen. Like there's been a million versions of their story told, and I just think it would be not like I'm not asking for like a super, you know, heavy romance. I'm just like, I think that would be so cute to see like them as kids and Krishna getting up to his Krishna stuff as a child. Like, I don't know. I think that's something that I'm not equipped to write, so I'm putting it out in the world. Somebody write it.
I would also love it so much. Yeah, me and you, we would be the audience for it.
Yes. Okay, for both of you, do you have a favorite or comfort Bollywood movie? This is like a bit of a, maybe it's not a weird answer, but like my comfort favorite Bollywood movie is Lagan.
Really?
Yes.
What? That's not a weird answer. It's a lovely film.
It's just like, I like my the song Mitva from it. My like family, like my parents' generation, my grandparents did like a dance to it at my sangeet at my wedding. Like that's the level of obsession I have with this film. I think I just saw it at like a very like formative age, like 8 or something. And so it was like, I'd only seen like 3 or 4 Bollywood movies at that point. And the whole just like sticking it to the British via cricket and like the sports bro moments, it was over for me. So that's mine.
That is such a good film as well. I love that film.
Yeah.
I guess I'm torn between two. So I usually sort of talk about Mughal Azam because it had a big impact on me and I really cared about it. But I was such a weird kid, and my dad worked in Bollywood for a while. He wasn't famous or anything, but he was in some films and did cinematography and things. So he really loved the old films and the old music. He had this humongous collection, and I was never that interested, but occasionally he'd catch me. And I watched Bakiza, and I loved that film so much. I was so obsessed with the whole sequence where the mother of the main character was like, I'm so sad, I'm just going to go give birth and die in a graveyard. I thought that was great. Loved it. Very invested in that film. I don't know if you know about it, so
I don't know this movie, so now it's like getting on my watch list.
It was, I think, Meena Kumari's last film before she died, and it took years to film. It was completely over budget, and it was about a courtesan who didn't want to be a courtesan, basically, and escaped that life. But it was very tragic, the whole thing, and it's so extra. Like, there's the guy falls in love with her feet as a start. That because he sees her sleeping on a train and he sees the bells around her feet, and he writes her a letter and leaves it with her. And there's a whole song about trains that I love that I used to sing as a kid. And there's a bit where someone dances on broken glass. Yeah, it
has all of the Bollywood classics. We're getting
it has everything. But the other thing is Om Shanti Om. That's probably my comfort film.
Oh my gosh,
because
Om Shanti Om.
I love it so much.
There was an Om Shanti Om medley also at my Sangeet.
Really?
I told my sister, so my sister did not come through. I told my sister that if she would do Darde Disco and rip her shirt open, I would pay her $100. But she chickened out and did not do a shirt rip open during Darde Disco.
How dare she? How dare she?
I know.
So Om Shanti Om is this, for those who don't know, it's a film about films, basically. So it's like a love story to film, and it has a reincarnation romance, and I will write one of those one day. I'm so invested in that. But it has this moment in it where the main character is like drunk, and he says, you know, until you get the happy ending, the film isn't over. And every time he says that, for some reason, I just start bawling like a child. But yeah, I love that film.
Oh my gosh. And like the I just like lose my mind every time.
Oh.
We're speaking a common language that I don't think everyone in this chat speaks.
No,
so I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
To those of you who have not seen Om Shanti Om, it is definitely on Netflix, and you should. It's 3 hours well spent.
You'll have a great time, and we support you. Yes, and Arjun Rampal. He's great. Love him.
Yeah, it's all bangers. It's all bangers. So, and a little bit of Bollywood silliness too. So, what more could you ask?
Oh yeah, it's so melodramatic and it makes you feel things, but it also doesn't take itself that seriously, which is the best combination.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Somebody said we're watching A Close Friendship Bloom, which reminded me of another movie. That is not my comfort movie. I would be concerned if anybody said this was their comfort movie, but Devdas, which is the first time I ever saw the like cutaway close up on a flower blooming, because they can't like show certain things in Bollywood movies, and that just reminded me of all of that.
The whole dance that it was Aishwarya Rai and who was Varani Mukherjee?
Dolare.
Yeah, that one. That is like, I know it's not gay, but it is gay. Like, I know it's not gay, but it is gay.
It is. It feels very gay.
Yeah, it's extremely gay.
Yes, I think
that's another one to
danced
watch.
To 6 out of 8 of the songs in that movie. Every song is a banger. So, that's. I mean, we're now just pitching Bollywood movies. So.
Oh, sorry, it's Madhuri, not Rani Mukherjee. Thank you.
Yes, it's Madhuri. But it's so good, so good. And then the last scene is just like so traumatic.
No, can't cope with the last scene. No.
Yeah. And the music, like it's too much. Movies that children should not be watching definitely did.
Yeah, definitely.
100% many times. Okay, next question, because we still have 12 questions. So we're going to go speed round. Speed round. Are we going to get a Rao Aditya romance, or is their romance just a platonic, definitely will end up in fanfic you legally can't read?
I can't legally read fanfic, but I would love if people wrote unhinged fanfic. I will put my line here now that just because I've always wanted to say this, if you want to write things that I would never have written, go for it. It's fully in your power. I can't stop you, nor can I read it, but do it because it would make me happy. Well, I can't answer this question because it's a spoiler. But I will leave it at that.
Great. We're going to
I don't
so
yeah.
The next question is Tasha Suri still planning on writing a follow-up sequel to the books of Umpha?
No. A lot of the stuff that I wanted to do, I think either would work as its own thing, or has been taken by the Jasmine throne, like it stole a lot of plot lines that I would have used. I used to joke with a friend actually that I wanted to write like a romance between Meher's daughter, adoptive daughter, and like some guy, and we used to call it the daddy warlord romance. I don't know if that actually fits it anymore at all, but now I'm never going to do that, so I'm just going to share that with you.
I love how you're just like, you can write this now. You can imagine it in your head for yourself.
Oh, I know what happens in that story, so I don't have to.
No, I'm saying for the rest of us.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. You can imagine anything that happens in that.
What is something you wish you could have included in the Jasmine throne but couldn't?
I think it's so long that I definitely threw everything in that I wanted to throw in. So no, it's fine. It's got everything in that I wanted to put into it.
I love that. Priyanka says hi Priyanka. One of my favorite scenes in Oleander is a Rao Aditya scene. So let that be a pitch to whoever asked that question. When is the third last book coming out? Any details that you can share right now about it?
I can share that I'm writing it, and if it's later than you hope, it is my fault. Absolutely. It's hard because I don't know if there's anything I can say about the third book that wouldn't spoil the second book, but big events happen in the second book, as often happen in a second book.
I was going to say.
Yes. So a lot of the consequences of those are being dealt with in the third book, but hopefully, whenever I think of like a perfect ending, I think of some of the endings that have really moved me that I've read in the past, and I'm just trying to do my best to recreate that magic. So I will do my best to make it a great book. I can't tell you when it will be out, but hopefully in 2023.
That's a great answer. Are there any future writing projects you are excited about?
At the moment, book 3. Book 3 is the big one that I'm excited about. I always have new ideas, but it's just a matter of like, I want to focus on this one, get it done, and then I will write another sapphic fantasy probably. It's my plan.
We love that.
Vaishnavi, do you have anything that you're looking forward to writing that you can talk about? I keep pushing. I know you can't answer this.
I know. And now that we know Priyanka's in the chat, I doubly cannot answer anything. Not that I was going to before. No, so I am currently working on another myth retelling project that I've said I'm working on, which is 2023. And then I've been like, instead of studying for the bar this summer, working on like this very weird alternate history project. So I might not pass the bar, but I might have another book. So, pros and cons. No, Priyanka, I'm kidding. It was in jest. Please do not go.
I will not ask you more about the alternate history, but I love alternate history, so that would be so exciting.
I will say that's like nobody has seen that one. So that's just between me and my God and a stack of research books looming in the corner. But it's been a lot of fun, and it is what I use to avoid law things like I do with all my writing. Whenever I don't feel like being a lawyer, I write instead. So
now that I write more or less all the time, I always have another book idea that I'm thinking of or working on in my head. So that's my like escape book that I'm like, I can't deal with the book I have to write. This story is the one that I'm writing. And I actually do, you can't see it behind my head, but there is a humongous pile of research books on a project that I'm actively not writing.
Oh, well, I've just said a couple of words about the project I'm not writing. So I feel like it's your turn. Why don't you share the title of a book that you are researching from, if you cannot share?
I've got one book on Elizabeth I for some reason. It's actually not that relevant. Instruments of Darkness, Witchcraft.
Oh my God.
Pagan Britain. So it's a slight departure, but it's really fun, really interesting books.
So excited. Oh my God. You're saying all the right words. For real. Okay. I said speed round and then we got stuck.
We keep doing this. I know. No, it's me.
For both, if you had to teleport an IP character, Paddington, as an example, that you've watched or read, who would you pick and how would they affect the world of your books? Well, I have the perfect cop-out answer, which is that I write retelling. So I'm already writing in somebody else's world. And I just get to import whoever I want to import. I will say that a character that I wish I could have imported into Kaikei, but just could not figure out how to do it, is Hanuman, who is this like monkey god.
No, that would have been great. Yeah.
He can fly. It's just like, I don't know where in the book I could have fit another Ramayan character. We were truly running out of room at that point. But I'll say like that's somebody I wish could have been included. And he is canonically in that world off screen, doing his monkey thing somewhere and being a general badass as Hanuman is.
It's weird. I didn't even notice that he was missing, and now you've said it, I feel a great sense of loss that he wasn't there. But I understand how you can.
You and my sister can like form a support group because she was really upset about this. She was quite mad.
I want Paddington to come into my world just because I think that's the funniest thing I've ever heard, and I can't imagine it. Someone said Paddington eating a sandwich. I don't even know if there are sandwiches. He wouldn't really cope very well. I don't think sandwiches are a concept yet. I guess you could have like a kathi roll or something.
Paddington eating a kathi roll. That is so good.
I need that to be true now. Yeah.
That's, you can write like a little snippet, like a 500-word snippet that's just Paddington, and you could offer that as like a pre-order incentive. I feel like I would order like 500 copies of that story. So I think it could be very effective.
It could absolutely be effective.
Okay, next question. For Tasha, given this is your 5th book and that you have written adult fantasy and a YA historical retelling, what do you hope to fulfill with your story range, and what was the biggest writing level up and like personal philosophy wise? So I think they're asking about like how have you leveled up your writing and how have you managed to write so many different like genres, age categories, which is also something I'm curious about.
Oh,
how do you do it? What are your secrets?
No secrets. I think that I'm lucky in the sense that I've always written things that really interested me, and it's like on a deeply trash level. Like, I don't think I write trash. I'll be clear. I do research and I do work very hard on my craft, but I start from that kind of, okay, you know how in fanfic people go, I just really love this trope, so I'm going to write it. Yeah, that's what I do.
It's basically like the raccoon eat trash, be free meme.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
we're
I am the raccoon. Yes. So with Wuthering Heights, I got the opportunity to be part of a series, so that was always going to be YA, and I do love YA, so I was like, cool, I could go in there. But that was very much like, I love Wuthering Heights. I want to write fanfic of Wuthering Heights very well and professionally, but nonetheless, I want to be paid for it. Somebody will let me do that, I will do it. So in terms of leveling up, it's a weird one because I think that obviously you become a stronger writer with every book, but maybe what's really happening is I feel more able to write true to myself with every book. I don't know how else to put that. Like, I had to work very, very hard to find a way to write Indian-inspired fantasy or South Asian-inspired fantasy when I started. Like, I didn't have any references to work from. I was working on Empire of Sand, for example, when the Star Touched Queen came out. So I was like, I had nothing to kind of draw from in a meaningful way. And I didn't have anything in my head.
Empire of Sand meant a lot to me for that exact reason. I mean, I love that book as well, but it was like one of the, like at the time I started wanting to write Gaiki, there were really 2 books in recent memory that I could be like, oh, Indian-inspired fantasy. It's out there. And it was you and Roshni Chokshi. So
it's genuinely weird
lot
realizing like how short the time has been since this change has happened. Like we still, to be fair, we still are only barely getting like SFF from India available abroad. But like diaspora science fiction and fantasy also just kind of only just starting to become available. And I think that it felt like a big leap for me at the time. And now I feel much more comfortable making big leaps. Like I feel much more like I can look back and go, I did it before, I can do it again. So I feel a little bit braver with what I write, I guess.
That's a great answer, I think. And I think Nick is here.
Yes, believe me, I do not want to cut this conversation off. Like, everyone has such great questions, and both of you have like wonderful conversation and answers. I'm like, I have to though. I'm the bad guy now.
Not at all.
No, you're saving us from ourselves.
I know. Honestly, we've talked about raccoon memes, so possibly we have to be cut off now.
No. You know, a conversation is great when memes are involved. That's when, like, yeah. I legitimately actually bought a meme raccoon shirt yesterday on I won't advertise the website because I don't get paid for it, but yes, so I was like, yes.
If only you were wearing it right now, that would be perfect. Sorry, I will let you finish.
No, I know, but I gotta wait for it to come in the mail, 7 days and all that. All right, I have to be the bad guy, everyone. I am so sorry we couldn't answer all your questions, but you had so many great questions. Vaishnavi, you had wonderful questions yourself, and you both just I'm glad this happened, that you both can talk with each other, because you have such great chemistry, and I loved listening to both of your stories. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for inviting us over.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. This has been so much fun.
Yes.
Agreed.
If anyone tuned in late, you can actually rewatch the event as a replay on the same link. We're also going to be re-uploading this to our YouTube channel in the next day or so. So this will live forever on YouTube, unless we get copyright struck or something. I don't know. There's so many things we talked about. And if you haven't yet gotten your own copies of the Oleander Sword, we have paperback and the library hardcover edition. We talked about this before the chat, Tasha. We still, it went flying. We still have many art cards to include with your order. And if you want to buy Kaikei, we also have signed book plates from Vaishnavi, and we will gladly send across the globe. There's only a few countries we can't just because of weird like shipping rules right now, but we shop internationally too. So go ahead and order. Thank you so much, Tasha. Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. This was wonderful. Oh.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for coming as well.
Yes, this was such a lively chat and question box. So it was a lot of fun.
All right, everyone. I hope you have a great evening, morning, day, whatever time and place you are in. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Good night.